Before we begin tonight's episode, the story discusses suicide and historical violence against Indigenous peoples. Listener discretion is advised. If these topics are difficult for you, please consider skipping this episode or listening when you feel prepared. Across the vast plains of South Dakota, the land holds memories. Memories of buffalo herds that once thundered across the prairie. Memories of sacred dances meant to restore balance to a broken world. And memories of violence that changed the course of Indigenous history forever. But among these memories, some people say something still lingers. A shadow. A tall, thin figure that walks silently across the hills. A man with impossibly long limbs, a blank face, and a black stovepipe hat. Some say he appears at the edge of the trees. Others claim he watches from the darkness of abandoned roads. But those who speak of him often describe something far more terrifying. Because Walking Sam doesn't just watch. They say he whispers, and those who hear him may never be the same again. Tonight, we explore the eerie and tragic legend of Walking Sam. Welcome back, witches and wanderers, to the Morbid Witch Podcast. I'm your host, Kari, and tonight's story is not a creature from ancient mythology or medieval folklore. Instead, it is a modern legend tied deeply to the history and trauma of Indigenous communities in the United States. Walking Sam is a shadowy figure said to roam the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, home of the Oglala Lakota people. Descriptions of Walking Sam paint a haunting image. A tall figure, often said to stand 7 feet or taller. Extremely thin, with long, unnatural arms and legs. A blank face without a mouth or nose. And atop his head sits a tall black stovepipe hat. Some who have encountered stories of Walking Sam say his appearance resembles the internet horror figure, Slender Man. In fact, some believe the legend of Walking Sam may have influenced the creation of that infamous character. But the story of Walking Sam is far older than internet horror, and it is deeply intertwined with a painful chapter in American history. To understand the legend of Walking Sam, we must first look at the events that scarred the land of South Dakota more than a century ago. In the late 1800s, Indigenous communities across the American West were struggling under the pressure of forced relocation, cultural suppression, and starvation brought on by broken treaties. During this time, a spiritual movement began to spread across native tribes. It was called the Ghost Dance. The Ghost Dance was not a violent uprising. It was a ceremony, a sacred dance believed to bring healing, restore balance to the world, and reunite the living with ancestors who had passed on. For many Indigenous people, it represented hope. But to the United States government, the movement looked like a rebellion. In 1890, the U.S. Army moved to suppress it. This conflict culminated in one of the most tragic events in American history, the Wounded Knee Massacre. U.S. cavalry forces opened fire on a group of Lakota Sioux, many of whom were unarmed. Among the dead were women and children. By the time the shooting stopped, hundreds of Lakota people had been killed. The massacre left deep wounds that remain part of the collective memory of the Lakota people. And for some, Walking Sam is believed to be a shadow born from that history. Nearly a century after the massacre, the land around Wounded Knee would once again become a site of conflict. In 1973, Native American activists and members of the American Indian movement occupied the town of Wounded Knee. The protest turned into a 71-day standoff between activists and federal law enforcement. The occupation drew national attention to the struggles of Native communities, including poverty, treaty violations, and systemic injustice. The land around Pine Ridge holds layers of history, stories of resistance, stories of suffering, and according to some, stories of spirits that linger in the aftermath. Among local stories of the Pine Ridge Reservation is the figure known as Walking Sam. Accounts describe him as a dark silhouette walking across the hills at night. His body appears impossibly thin and tall. His arms hang unnaturally long at his sides, and his face, if it can be called that, appears blank. No mouth, no nose, just a smooth, shadowy surface. Most disturbing of all is the belief that Walking Sam possesses a supernatural ability. Some say he can influence the minds of those who encounter him, whispering thoughts, planting ideas, guiding people toward dangerous actions. Stories say that once someone begins seeing Walking Sam, he continues to appear again and again, watching, waiting, walking silently through the night. In 2015, the legend of Walking Sam made national news. That year, the Pine Ridge Reservation experienced a heartbreaking surge in youth suicides and suicide attempts. The crisis was devastating for the community. Within months, multiple young people had taken their lives. Local schools and families struggled to understand what was happening. During this time, some teenagers began speaking about Walking Sam. They described seeing a tall, shadowy figure before suicide attempts occurred. Others claimed he appeared in dreams or visions. Whether these stories reflected folklore, psychological stress, or the way communities process trauma, the legend quickly spread among young people on the reservation. Some began to refer to Walking Sam as a suicide spirit, a dangerous presence that lured vulnerable people toward despair. It is important to note that mental health experts emphasize that suicide crises are complex and influenced by many factors, including poverty, historical trauma, and limited access to mental health resources. But folklore often emerges during times of fear and grief. And for many on Pine Ridge, Walking Sam became a symbol of the darkness affecting their community. Because of his appearance, Walking Sam is frequently compared to the internet horror figure, Slender Man. Both are described as extremely tall, thin humanoids with featureless faces. Both are said to influence the mind of those who encounter them. However, the legend of Walking Sam is rooted in real communities and real history. Unlike fictional creepypasta stories, this legend exists within the cultural context of indigenous experiences and generational trauma. For many people, the figure of Walking Sam represents something symbolic, a manifestation of grief, a shadow born from historical suffering, or simply a story used to give shape to something that feels impossible to explain. Legends like Walking Sam often reveal more about human experience than about supernatural creatures. They arise when communities face hardship, when tragedy demands explanation, when grief searches for a face. In this way, Walking Sam may represent the lingering shadows of the past, the wounds left behind by violence, displacement, and generations of struggle. The tall shadow walking across the hills may not be a monster, but the story reminds us that history itself can cast long shadows. Thank you for listening to the Morbid Witch Podcast. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, you can find the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, and iHeartRadio. If you're listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like the episode, and leave a comment. And if you're listening on Spotify, please consider leaving a rating for the show. Until next time, stay strange, stay spooky, and remember, the shadows are always watching.